Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Rob Palumbo from OAA Orthopedic Specialists, and I have a great guest with me tonight. It's one of my great podiatric surgeons that we have at OAA, Dr. Dean Sorrento. How you doing, Dean?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, it's great to have you. Did you have a long day today? Yeah.
Yeah, I was in surgery. Pretty good.
So it's always good to be in surgery, the
Yeah.
womb of the operating room. So, well, I hope you had a great day. I hope that was good. I know it's after a long day, so I appreciate your being here. So,
Happy to be here.
looking forward to it. So, first of all, Dean, I wanted to let people. I want you to kind of introduce yourself about some of your schooling, and then what your interests are going as far as our foot and ankle center, and just go on. So just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. So I graduated from the Temple University School of Podiatric Medicine back in '96. And then I did one of the only 4-year residencies in our field back then, which was at the University of Pennsylvania Health System at Presbyterian Hospital in Philadelphia. And so my training was a little unique and was trained by some of the leaders in our profession. I actually helped author a chapter in a textbook in foot and ankle surgery. So we were pretty academic. And so a lot of the stuff we saw, some of it was revisional work, and a lot of it was more of the reconstruction type, both elective and some trauma.
So you had a lot of training. I mean, you're not just a lot when people think of podiatry, they tend to think a little bit more of the forefoot and plantar fasciitis and the such. But you're really a reconstructive surgeon. I mean,
It's interesting because the model they have now for our profession basically is what I started out in. And in general, it's you do a 2 or 3 year residency, and now in our field there are many fellowships, which because they don't, I guess, get the volume, or if you want, you can really super specialize if you want to. For example, some of our other colleagues do a lot of wound care, and so there's a place for that too. And I never focused on that aspect of it, but so they have fellowships, and what I did was probably the model for that. So you do 3 years plus another year, and essentially that's what it was. And we trained heavily with orthopedics as well as general surgeons, so we were pretty well-rounded.
something that you really wanted to talk about. It's probably one of the more common things we see in foot and ankle, and that's bunions. And I know you want to
Sure.
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so a bunion for everyone out there is basically prominence that people will notice at their great toe joint. A lot of times it may seem as though it's just a bump. Other times when it's more severe, they may notice that their big toe starts to deviate towards their second toe. Sometimes it can go under the toe, sometimes it can go over top of the toe. And that ultimately, if it progresses, can cause more severe deformity with a hammer toe or something we call a crossover toe. So it can become, a debilitating entity if it progresses to a certain extent.
So, Dean, I'm gonna share a screen so you can
Sure.
talk us through it, and
Okay.
let me let's see if let's see let's see if my son taught me well. Hold on. Here, hold on. Here we go. Can you see what I see as far as?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So we're looking at mild to severe, and so why don't you talk us through it? And the feet are on top, the X-rays are on the bottom.
Yeah, so starting with the most mildest form, which is to the left, you can see how the first metatarsal, which is the long bone behind the big toe joint, right there. Underneath that bone, you'll see 2 small circular bones. We call those the sesamoid bones. And basically they're supposed to be there, and they act as a fulcrum for the tendons that go underneath the foot that control the movement of the big toe. So in normal situation, we should see those sesamoid bones should not be apparent anywhere in the x-ray other than underneath that bone. So in an ideal situation, we should see that the sesamoids are not peaking, so to speak. Like even in this mild case, we see the outer sesamoid towards the second toe, you can see it sticking out. And so ideally that should be covered. So in a normal circumstance, in a mild case, even like this, we can start to see the bones start to deviate away from the other 5 bones that are all perfectly straight.
And so you're saying, and hopefully this is coming out. Can you see my
Yep.
arrow?
Yes.
So this
exactly
is deviating outwards a little bit, yeah?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so as we progress, you can see if we get to the moderate form, you start seeing a little more of the sesamoid bone, but you also start to see that now the skin starts becoming prominent because that bone starts deviating more. And what a lot of people, sometimes it's an assumption, and it's a normal assumption because that's all they see, is their interpretation of this is that there's an actual growth on the bone when it's an actual angular deformity that's progressing that looks like a bump, but it's an actual bone that's sticking out. As we can see here, if we go from moderate to large, you can see how the bone is becoming more prominent, sticking out. You now see more of the sesamoid bone in the inner space there, and you can start to see the progression of the deviation of the great toe towards the second toe.
And what is also interesting is you're seeing, I'm going to try to do this, so hold on a second. If you look at that angle, you see how the angle between the first and second rays are getting significantly different, right?
Significantly larger. And that's where, as we get into this more and more, and you can start to see with the more severe, the later consequences of this, the great toe no longer has any room. And so as the deformity progresses, there's no room to escape the deviation. So it goes underneath the second and third toe, and the second and third toe have no other option but to try to move out of the way. And that causes a contracture of both the joints and the tendons in the second toe, which ultimately leads to rubbing on the in the shoe gear. And sometimes people will come in with this, even at the severe level here, they won't be necessarily, sometimes won't complain the bunion, but their biggest complaint is that the second toe is rubbing in the shoe.
Right, and they get what people often call a corn or a hammer toe there.
Exactly.
That's what's rubbing on the phone, and I mean rubbing in. I just remember my grandmother just used to stretch her shoes more.
Yeah.
That's what.
Yeah. And back in the day, we used to do that. We used to send them to a pedorthist to have. They actually had a device that would stretch the shoe.
Right. It was. I remember that clamp.
They would cut a hole in it and put a patch on it.
That's right. That's right. So.
But the other thing to realize here is that if we the joint that the bunion is stemming from is very critical. If we can just point that out, and that is the foundation of the deformity. And what we didn't really know years ago is that that joint is fairly unstable. And we're talking about the first, where the great toe meets the first square bone there.
Hold on, let me just, I'm trying to, hold on, let's see. There we go. Woo! I know, like I said, I'm an old man trying new tricks. But you're talking about this joint here.
Oh, that's the great toe. And then the one at the base, the first tarsometatarsal joint.
Gotcha. Let me move that up. Yep, go ahead.
Yep, so that's it right there. And that's the apex of our deformity. So essentially, if that joint is unstable, this bone is going to progressively deviate further and further.
So this could continue to go this way.
Exactly. And what we didn't realize many years ago, because there's hundreds of bunion procedures where you do what's called an osteotomy, which basically is just a medical term for a bone cut, to shift the bone over so that's no longer prominent. Well, that's all well and good. The problem with that procedure is there's about, in some cases, up to a 70% recurrence rate when you do that, and you fail to recognize that this base, which you have outlined there, if that foundation is unstable, even though you cut the bone up at the toe level and move it over, the deformity will come back.
So there's still, and so there's still a mobile joint right here,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yep.
Because I mean, there were a lot, like you said, there was a lot of different procedures. There was procedures where, you'd make a dome. I remember, back in the day, there was a dome
The
cut here,
crescentic.
and you just move that over.
Exactly.
There's a bunch of other ones where you do the cuts up top here, but
You
certainly,
right scarf, Z, crescentic bone cut, all different kind of bone cuts all along that bone. But the problem is none of them are addressing the actual unstable joint. And the other critical thing here is that about if you don't realize, the other thing we learned through research is that while what we're looking at here, mainly you see one plane of deformity,
right,
the obvious plane where the bone is sticking out on the side. But in actuality, this is a three-dimensional problem, and it's a three-dimensional deformity. And what do we mean by that? Well, the bone is leaning out, as we can see, which opens up the bone, and you can see the angle increase. However, the bone also elevates, and the most critical thing is it's rotated.
right.
And it's rotated towards the lesser toes, which we call eversion. And if you correct this and do not address all three planes, they found that there's a 12 times increase in recurrence rate.
And plus, if you don't get this just right, you get these pressure areas underneath the other toes.
Exactly. There's compensation on the other metatarsals because of the increased force.
That's why I'm so glad you guys are here, because you deal with it. So, we're going to go to one of your cases that you had done, and so you could go through it a little bit. And again, what you're going to show now is a technique that you use on more of these severe bunions, correct?
Yes, and even some of these, some of the milder ones, if the joint is unstable, they still may qualify for this because
Gotcha.
there's a way to test that in the office. Sometimes we actually strap the foot, and if I see that joint opens up immediately, then I can tell it's pretty unstable.
So if it wedges open over here,
exactly.
yeah.
And even on a lateral view, sometimes you'll see a plantar gapping on the x-ray, which just means that joint's open. And then we tape the foot. So I take an x-ray like you're seeing here, and I tape the foot really tight to push that bone in. Well, that tells me that.
You kind of bind it like this.
Exactly. And that joint, it tells me if I can reduce that and the toe's perfectly straight, I know that joint's unstable, because if I do a bone cut up by the toe, I am not correcting that bone in three planes.
Right. This will just keep going out that way.
Exactly. And then you have what looks like a crooked bone on the x-ray.
Like this. Like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's go to one of your cases. There we go. And so there's kind of a before and after. So why don't you talk us through this a little bit?
So this is in the severe category. We can see how the deviation of the bone is rather significant. We see the sesamoid is totally sticking out, which it shouldn't be. We can see the deviation of the great toe is starting to push some of the lesser toes over. And back at the base, we could see that there's a significant instability at this joint here.
Right.
So,
and then, and then the other thing, I guess, Dean's, I know you look at where the articular cartilage is on this at the end of the bone, and this is slipped all the way off of your good surface, right?
Exactly right.
So why don't you go through? Now I know what you don't see here is the soft tissue stuff you do up top.
Right. So on this side where the bone is sticking out, all those there are multiple ligaments and tendons. The main one of which is significantly contracted on the side of the little sesamoid bone there. So that's what's pulling everything over. If you don't release that to create some mobility, it's going to be harder to reduce the bone and get it in the right angle. So one is part of the surgery, we actually go into that interspace and we release the ligament that's attaching that joint together, as well as a tendon that's pulling the toe over. And that gives us some pliability to reduce the contracture that's developed over time. And so that's one of the first steps before we even go back to the joint to reposition the bone.
So basically you have to cut this right here, and then the ligament that was here, you also have to release.
Yep, we release that. We release, there's also a ligament that attaches the metatarsal to the sesamoid, and all of that is all released because that's providing a significant contraction.
Gotcha.
So the unique thing about this is, what you can't see here is once we do that part, we then go back to the joint that you have circled there. And the first thing we do is we just take a saw and we just release the ligament attachments of that joint. We don't remove any bone or anything. We just release the joint entirely so that it's freely mobile. As we know with joints, they're attached by ligaments. So once we make an incision, we release the joint just so it's entirely mobile. Once we have that, the unique thing about this procedure is we take a joystick and we put it right in front of the joint, and we actually derotate the bone out of the abnormal rotation that it's in. And it's amazing when you see this on x-ray, you actually see the bone go back over top of those little sesamoid bones, even with just rotating it over.
So you kind of,
and that's before we've taken the joint away.
Right. So you kind of crank this joystick down here to move it that
right
way.
We lift it up, which derotates the bone.
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing this live under x-ray to see if we have enough release of the contractures up at the joint, as well as the joint where we're going to work to mend it. So that tells us that we're released, because when I rotate that joystick, I will actually make the bone go back to where it's supposed to be. So once we do that part, we then have a jig that we put on that actually positions the bone the way you see it on the right-hand screen. Mm-hmm. And that's before we cut the joint out. So the unique thing about this procedure is we're checking x-rays, we're going back and forth, and we've actually, before we've even taken a saw to that joint, we've positioned that bone and corrected it in all three planes before we actually take a saw and take away the joint, which is necessary to get a mending of that joint.
So I'm just going to draw these lines here to let people. Come on. So that's your correction of that angle there. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. So what we have is we have a jig, and it literally pushes the bone over, and it's held there. And once it's held in the position we want, we check multiple x-rays. Then we actually, no different than a knee replacement or, where you have a cutting guides. We actually put cutting guides over top of the joint, and precision tells us where to cut with removing very little bone to not get a lot of shortening. And so it takes only the cartilage off, but it's taking it off in the position that we've already corrected it. And the jig is maintaining our alignment. We then take out the cartilage. We fenestrate both sides with a drill bit to get it bleeding, because that's required to get it to fuse. And then once we do that, still maintaining the jig, there's a compressor device that we put on, and it just squeezes it together, all the while maintaining the alignment. And then at the end of that, we put our fixation in. So it's really a unique take on a procedure. This procedure has been around for years. Right. We just used to do it differently. We used to take we used to take the joint down first, and then you try to wrestle with it and try to get it where you want it. We try to pin it, we try to hold it there, and then we try to put either screws or a plate, and ultimately it would move around, and sometimes you would lose the correction. But this technique, called the Lapiplasty technique, it allows us to actually fix the bone first and then take the joint out, which is a very unique concept, and correct it in all three planes, which no other procedure does.
That's really cool. Now I'm trying to move this over and I'm not doing a good job, but hold on. Get rid of it. Sorry about that. So basically I want to show you the lateral too, so people can see what we're talking about is there's really two plates there that are really holding this together.
Right. So when this was, when they researched this technique, they found that when you have two plates that are 90 degrees to each other, so one on top and one on the side, you're really eliminating all the deforming forces that could potentially lead to what's the biggest issue with this is if it doesn't fuse, that's called a non-union. But you put one plate on the near the tension side, which is underneath, and then the other plate on the top. And meanwhile, we had a device that already compressed it for us. So sometimes we can use a compression screw, but it's actually not mandatory because we have a device that holds it compressed. And once you put these plates on, this unique design allows us to weight bear these patients as early as 10 days out.
Which is marvelous because that was the biggest, you know, so many, even with simple bunions and
non-weight bearing for 6 weeks.
And people just hated it. And, you know, then they would get so stiff because they weren't really allowed to move. And so you get all those contractures. And then it took so much longer for them to rehab it.
Exactly.
So yeah, this is fascinating. Yeah, I mean it's amazing how long it's come. That's really cool. So I'm gonna get back to us again. So glasses because I couldn't see a darn thing. So so Dean, that was really cool. I know this is like, you know, as far as what you do. I mean, this is a complex bunion. And these x-rays look awesome actually. And
thank you.
But you do, obviously you do a lot more intensive work when it comes into the hind foot and the ankle and that as well. And I just wanted to make sure everybody, you know, got to see your face and know your name, so they know where to go, because this is like I said, when it comes to technically involved foot and ankle, you know, we have somebody great and confident, and you know that we all trust to do it. And I appreciate you you being there and
thanks.
This was fun. And so, listen, I'd love to have you on again at some point in the future.
Great, I'd be happy.
For any of you guys that have any questions, you have any comments, please put them in the comment section down below. You know, good job, bad job, what you'd like to see in the future, because we really want to start doing this a lot more and more with all our partners at OAA, and just show you the expertise that we have, and hopefully answer some of the questions that you may have as well. So I know Dean would be ready to answer anything anytime in the future.
Absolutely.
About your foot and ankle problems, and obviously we anywhere musculoskeletal, we could take care of it. So put your comments down there. I hope you enjoyed this. Dean, thanks, man. Thanks. I know it's been a long day after surgery. You did a great job, so I appreciate it. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.